Okay, so let's dive right in. You know, we all love those unbelievable stories about people who survive the impossible, right? But what really happens after the rescue, after the news crews leave? Well, today we're going to look at some of the most mind-blowing survival stories ever recorded. And what you're going to find is that the story, it almost never ends when the person is found. In fact, that's often just the start of a whole new, much more complicated chapter. And we're going to start with a case that, and this is no exaggeration, literally changed how we understand the human brain. This is Phineas Gage. He was a railroad foreman back in 1848, known for being super reliable, a good guy. But his entire life and his very personality were about to be turned upside down by one of the freakiest accidents in medical history.
Now, you really have to appreciate the just brutal physics of what happened here. This wasn't some small piece of shrapnel. We're talking about a tamping iron. It was basically a giant metal spear, over 3.5 feet long, that got blasted clean through his head. It went in his cheek, out the top of his skull, and landed 80 feet away. The fact that he wasn't killed instantly is, well, it's almost impossible to believe.
And here's where it gets even crazier. Gage wasn't just alive, he was conscious. He was talking and walking to get help just minutes after it happened. His physical recovery was, frankly, amazing. But the real cost of him surviving, you couldn't see it. The man who came back was just different. And that change was a dark preview of the brain injury complications that would eventually take his life almost a decade later.
And this right here, this is the quote that has echoed through medical history ever since. The people who knew him best, his friends, his family, they were all clear on one thing. The body of Phineas Gage had survived, sure, but the person they knew, the man they called Gage, he was gone.
So this brings us to the big question, the central theme of this whole explainer. What does it actually mean to survive? Is it just about your heart still beating? Let's hang on to that thought for a minute, as we shift gears and look at survivors who didn't just face a split-second accident, but the full, raw power of nature itself. All right, so we're pivoting now. We're going from a single, freak accident to the relentless, totally unpredictable force of the planet. These next stories pit human beings against the wild in some of its most terrifying forms. So imagine this, you're out in the massive Siberian forest just collecting some birch sap, and it turns into an hour-long fight for your life. That's what happened to Natalia Pasternak. She was attacked by a brown bear and suffered just horrific injuries all over her body. And here is the unbelievable, ironic twist. The bear's own predatory instinct is the very thing that saved her. The bear thought she was dead, so it did something called defensive caching. It buried her under leaves and dirt to hide its meal for later. So when wildlife inspectors showed up, they found this bear guarding its kill, which led them right to Natalia, who was, incredibly, still breathing. Okay, from the forest floor, we're going way, way up into the atmosphere. Back in 2007, a champion paraglider named Eva Wisniewska was out training in Australia when she made a huge mistake. She ignored storm warnings and got sucked into a monster of a storm cloud that she had absolutely no chance of escaping. And this chart just brilliantly shows how insane her situation was. She was getting pulled up at nearly 50 miles per hour all the way to almost 33,000 feet. Now, to put that in perspective, that is higher than the peak of Mount Everest. She was in the death zone, where the air is way too thin for a human to survive. And at that altitude, she was unconscious, in temperatures of negative 67 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, that is cold enough to get severe frostbite in just seconds. All while lightning is flashing around her, and she's being pelted by hailstones the size of baseballs. Just unbelievable. Somehow, after 45 minutes completely passed out in the middle of this storm, she woke up at a lower altitude. She was dazed, freezing, literally covered in a sheet of ice, and she still managed to pilot her paraglider out of the storm and land safely. And the craziest part? She only had minor frostbite. So Iwa was saved by a piece of technology, right? Her parachute? But what happens when the very tech that's designed to keep us safe just fails? I mean, sometimes the threat isn't a bear or a storm. Sometimes it's the sudden, catastrophic breakdown of the machines we trust with our lives.
It was Christmas Eve, 1971. A 17-year-old named Julianne Kopke was on a flight with her mom, flying over the Peruvian Amazon when the plane flew into a huge thunderstorm. A bolt of lightning hit the wing, and the entire aircraft just started to disintegrate in midair.
She fell 2 miles. Just let that sink in for a second. 2 miles. Still strapped into her seat, she plummeted 10,000 feet out of the sky and crashed into the thick canopy of the most unforgiving rainforest on the planet.
But surviving the fall, that was just the beginning. She woke up alone with a broken collarbone and a concussion, and she couldn't even find her glasses. For 9 days, she followed a small creek. And then there's this incredible moment of sheer desperation and genius. She finds a small hut and uses gasoline from a motor to clean a maggot infestation out of a wound in her arm. That probably saved her life right there.
And this is the most chilling part of her entire story. It's the detail that really gets to the heart of this whole survivor's paradox. See, she wasn't the only one who survived the fall. It was later discovered that 14 other people, including her own mother, made it through the crash only to die in the jungle, waiting for a rescue that just never came in time.
Julianne's 9 days were a nightmare, but her story isn't the only one like it. Back in 1963, Helen Klaben and a pilot named Ralph Flores crashed in the frozen wilderness of the Canadian Yukon, and their trial was even longer. They were stranded for 49 days, that's 7 weeks, in temperatures that dropped to negative 58 degrees. Their food was gone in about a week. They survived on melted snow until, finally, a pilot spotted the SOS sign they'd stomped into the snow.
All of these stories, they're just miracles of human endurance. But they bring us right back to where we started, back to our opening question about Phineas Gage. What is the real price you pay for surviving the impossible?
So using modern scanning technology, researchers were finally able to map out the exact damage to Gage's brain. He lost 11% of his white matter and 4% of his cortex, and it was all concentrated in the frontal lobes. That's the part of the brain that basically runs your personality, your emotions, your decision-making. We can now literally see the physical reason why his friends all said he was no longer Gage.
So what becomes really clear when you look at all of these stories is that survival is never just a simple happy ending. For every single one of these miracles, there is a complicated and often pretty dark reality attached. Julianne Koepke survived, yeah, but 14 other people died waiting. Phineas Gage lived, but the man he didn't. Natalia Pasternak was found only because a predator was trying to save her for lunch. The miracle and the nightmare, they're really just two sides of the same coin.
So ultimately, these stories really force us to ask ourselves what survival truly means. Is it about that one single moment where you cheat death? Or is it about the entire life that comes after, living with the memories, the trauma, and the person you become because of what happened? You see, surviving the event is one thing, but as all these stories show, the real challenge, the much harder part, is surviving the survival.